Hi Village friends, welcome back to Kelly Does Stuff. Today's video we are going to talk about hiding cords for your Christmas village, Halloween village, any kind of village that you want to do. Today's tips, techniques, whatever you want to call them, is no tools required. We aren't using any tools. We are not going to be trenching into styrofoam. We are not going to be carving holes into foam. I'll do a separate video some other time about those opportunities. We're kind of going old school, vintage. We're gonna do vintage cord hiding. Now, depending on where you set up your village and how you set it up, some of these tips, techniques, opportunities might not be available to you. Like you'll hear me say, like, throw the cord back there. You're like, well, I set up my village in a bookcase. It's closed. I'm not throwing a cord behind anything. But we'll talk about a couple different opportunities for hiding cords. So hopefully some of those will be available to you and work for you. Now, what I like about hiding cords this way is it doesn't require a lot of advanced planning or work. You can get your pieces, like maybe an elf dropped 100 buildings down to your house right now, lucky you, and you just want to go ahead and put those buildings up and set them down. You don't have to do the carving and the trenching ahead of time and then think about where everything is going to go. This allows you to just like get to it. The other thing I like about this is if you're like me and you like to switch up your village from year to year, which is what I do for my Christmas village, I feel like if I don't trench and carve holes, this gives me a little bit more flexibility. I have a bit of commitment issues when it comes to setting up my Christmas village. I like to change up the placement of the actual building. I like to sometimes put too close to each other, and then maybe the next year I like to have a little bit more room. So this gives me a little bit more flexibility from year to year. And this, like I said, is Christmas village. If it's Halloween, anytime you hear me say snow, just throw moss, switch out snow for moss. All right, let's get hiding.
My first tip is leave yourself some space. Between the table and the wall is obvious, and it's less about hiding the cords, but just a little reminder to make sure that you do that. The first few years that I would set up, I would get so excited and I would shove those tables all the way up against the wall. I would put my buildings down and then go back and add my cords, and I would be like, oh yeah, I gotta move that table back out. But maybe you're working with a couple tables and setting them up in a U shape or an L shape. Leave yourself some space between those tables because you can run cords down in that gap. This could be a great option if you've got a second row of buildings like I do in my town center. I've got a back row that is closest to the wall. Then I have a row in front of it. And that second row there, I run those cords from the building down into that gap. So here's a little example of both of those. We're kind of throwing this back behind the table, but not quite because we have that mountain face right there. So we're threading this down in a gap between those two stacks of styrofoam and then running back behind the table. One thing to remember and think about is where do you want to hide the little switch on the plug on the cord? Here I'm toying with tucking it behind this building here and then hiding all of that with some snow or some trees. That allows me to close that gap between those pieces of styrofoam. Or I could move my styrofoam stack here a little bit to hide that switch down in the gap and then cover that with some snow or some trees. This, of course, is just going to be a preference. What do you like better? And then it's also going to depend on the materials that you are using to display your pieces. Another idea for hiding cords is what I kind of think of as my exit points. Where are the places that I can thread those cords between pieces of foam? And then I can smoosh those pieces of foam back together or cover up those exit rows out to the back of the table with, again, snow, trees, other village materials that are going to go into my display. And if I kind of want to control the cord a little bit and not have it be all squiggly like that, I will tuck a piece of the cord under some of the foam. So you can see right here, I'm just going to lift up that foam a little bit, tuck that cord under, and that will kind of keep it in place a little bit better. And here's another example of that. I had thread that cord between some of that foam, and then I just push that foam back together, close up the gap. Now, sometimes my closest exit point might be a little bit further away, so I will run the cords behind the buildings and then again find that exit point to drop that cord back behind the table. So I'm threading it between some foam right there. Here's an area of my display where I have 3 buildings in kind of a semicircle. These 2 buildings on the right here, I'm going to thread those cords down here in that exit point area. And then this building, I'm going to thread that cord underneath that foam where that blue roof building is. I'm actually going to take that building off, pick up that foam, and then thread those cords through the gap in the styrofoam. Once that's in place, I'm going to put the styrofoam back. That was going to be the platform for the blue roofed building, but first I thread that cord into that same spot and then put it into the building, and that's going to go up kind of the back of the building a little bit. And then that right there, I will just cover that up with some snow. And a little tip when you are threading these cords, don't put them into the building yet. Get your cords in place. It can get really cumbersome to have those buildings attached to those cords as you're trying to get everything set, and it increases the chance that you'll knock those buildings into each other and chip off a part of your building. We've probably all been there. It's so sad. And once I have all the cords that I want to thread down that exit row, I will smoosh the styrofoam back together to close up that gap. My next tip is to run your cords underneath your styrofoam. Now, as I said, this video, we're not going to be doing any trenching, carving. You don't need any tools. So we are literally just going to put it underneath that foam. And you're wondering, is it going to make the foam bumpy? A little bit, but not really. If you were putting a ton of cords under there, it might make it not lay flat enough to put other buildings on top. It might make it too uneven. But with just a couple cords, you should be fine. Just make sure that you don't have that switch underneath your foam. That definitely will make it too bumpy to lay flat. I've got a bit of extra cord here because of not shoving that switch underneath the foam. So I'm just going to tuck my extra cord behind the building and the styrofoam, and then I'll just cover up that gap with some snow. And I just wanted to show you here the buildings that I'm going to put on top of that piece of foam. It lays flat, my buildings are even, nothing is going to fall over. One thing to pay attention to is the position of that switch on the light cords. I noticed as I was doing this is that they're not all in the same spot. Some of them are closer to the plug and some of them are closer to the light. If you have a lot of buildings and you have the options of interchanging your cords, you may want to pick ones that work the best for how you want to thread them so that you don't have that switch underneath your foam. Most of the cords are pretty interchangeable with the buildings. Sometimes they are not, and I have put a wrong cord in there and it gets stuck and there are issues. But like I said, for the most part, you should be able to use any cord with any building. And here is another building that's going to have a little bit of extra cord sticking up. I'm just going to tuck it back behind the building in the styrofoam, cover it with snow. And we've talked about covering with snow, but another great way I will cover up a lot of that cord is with some trees. I love a ton of trees in my building, and they are a great opportunity to hide things. You can also use staircases, you can use your accessories, some benches. That will cover up a lot of the cord, and then anything else that is exposed, I just get that fluffy snow, and I will cover up the cords that are running behind the buildings. And here again is that little section of those 3 buildings that we had. Let's add some trees and snow to that exit area to cover up those cords. I wanted to give you a look at what my town center looks like with all of the cords in place. Any of the buildings in the back row, I drop behind the table, but the second row, that front row, those cords run behind the buildings and then they will drop down, like I said, to those gaps in between the tables. And there's what it looks like once we've got snow and accessories and trees in place. No more cords to be found. And this is a look behind the buildings with the snow covering up the cords. And here's that gap between those two tables, a lot of messiness there. Let's fix that. And that is it, friends. A couple easy ways to hide cords without a lot of advanced planning. I hope some or maybe even all of these tips were helpful for your village setup and creations. I would love it so much if you would give this video a like, share it with everybody you know who wants to hide some cords. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, it would mean so very, very much to me. A huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Have so much fun setting up and enjoying your villages. I look forward to seeing you all next time, and happy creating!